Hello, welcome to Science Reimagined. Let's go take a look at today's video.
You know, when you think of ancient Egypt, what comes to mind? Towering pyramids, golden masks, maybe even movie magic and mysterious curses. But how much of what we think we know is actually true? Today, we're going to peel back the layers and separate the Hollywood fiction from the archaeological facts. So let's dive in. Right, so was there really a terrifying curse on King Tut's tomb? Did every single person in ancient Egypt get the full mummy treatment for the afterlife? And what was the whole deal with all the animals, especially the cats? These are the big, sensational stories we all know, but trust me, the reality is way more interesting. All right, so here's our game plan. We're gonna tackle 5 huge misconceptions. First up, King Tut's so-called curse. Then, we'll get into who really got mummified. After that, we'll decode the truth about hieroglyphs, figure out what was going on with sacred animals, and finally, we'll investigate one of the most revolutionary pharaohs of all time. It's gonna be great. Okay, let's kick things off with the big one, the myth to end all myths, the deadly curse of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. It's a story that absolutely captivated the world, and it just refuses to die. This is it. This is the phrase that launched 1,000 horror movies. It's chilling, it's poetic, it sounds exactly like an ancient curse should. There's just one tiny problem. This sentence was never, ever found inside King Tut's tomb. Not on a wall, not on a tablet, not anywhere. It was completely made up. So, if it wasn't in the tomb, where did it come from? Well, the truth is a fantastic story of old school media rivalry. See, when the tomb was discovered back in 1922, the Times of London snatched up the exclusive reporting rights. All the other newspapers were left out in the cold, desperate for a scoop. So they started printing these wild, speculative stories, and you know what? A deadly curse sells way more papers. And then, the curse narrative got a massive, unbelievable boost. The man who paid for the whole excavation, Lord Carnarvon, died just a few months after the tomb was opened. The real cause? It was actually blood poisoning from a mosquito bite that got infected. But the media, they basically ignored that boring reality. I mean, come on, which story is better? Man dies from bug bite, or Pharaoh's curse claims first victim? It was a no-brainer. And here, right here, is where the whole myth just completely falls apart. Think about it. If there was a real curse, who would be victim number 1? It would have to be the guy who actually broke the seal and stepped inside first, right? Well, that man was Howard Carter, and he lived for another 17 years, dying of totally natural causes at the age of 64. So much for a swift-winged curse. All right, moving on to our second myth. We've all seen the movies. We have this idea that every ancient Egyptian was carefully wrapped up in linen bandages for their journey to the afterlife. But that royal treatment? In reality, that was a luxury perk reserved for the absolute top 1%. I mean, just look at what the elite process involved. It was a sacred 70-day-long ritual. After the body was cleansed, the organs were taken out. Interestingly, the brain was just discarded, but the heart, seen as the center of intelligence and emotion, was carefully left inside. Then the body was packed in a special salt called natron for months to dry it out completely, before it was anointed with all these expensive oils and resins and meticulously wrapped. It took a ton of time, skill, and resources. So what about everybody else? The farmers, the soldiers, the artisans? Well, for them, it was much, much simpler. Most people were just buried in simple, shallow pits at the edge of the desert. And here's the beautiful irony. The intensely hot, dry sand was an incredibly effective preservative. It would naturally suck all the moisture out of a body, preventing decay. The desert itself mummified them, and it didn't cost a thing. Yet, when you really look at the numbers, it puts it all in perspective. Those incredible gilded mummies we see in museums, they represent that tiniest sliver of the population, the royalty and the super rich. They are absolutely the exception, not the rule. For most Egyptians, the desert was their embalmer. Okay, next up, hieroglyphs. It's so tempting to look at these beautiful, intricate symbols and think of them as just a kind of ancient picture writing, right? Almost like the world's first emojis. But if you think that, you're missing the true genius of what's going on. The truth is, hieroglyphs were a full-blown, incredibly sophisticated language system. Sure, some of the signs do represent a whole idea or an object. We call those ideograms. But a whole lot of them are actually phonograms, meaning they represent sounds, just like the letters of our alphabet. You could combine them to spell out words. It was a flexible, complex system that could express really abstract and complicated thoughts. And this gets to the heart of what writing really meant to the Egyptians. Our word hieroglyph comes from the Greek for sacred carving, but the Egyptians themselves called their writing Medu Neger, which means divine words. They genuinely believed that writing was a magical gift from the gods, and that to write something down was to make it real and eternal. So you might be wondering, who could actually use this divine, magical gift? Well, the answer is almost nobody. Scholars estimate that only about 3 to 5% of the entire population could read and write. It was a skill jealously guarded by an elite class of scribes, priests, and government officials. That made literacy a massive tool of power and control. Now let's tackle one of the most common misunderstandings of all, the idea that ancient Egyptians literally worshipped animals. I get it. You see all these depictions of gods with the heads of jackals and falcons and cats, and it's pretty easy to jump to that conclusion. So let's just ask it straight up. Did the ancient Egyptians get down on their knees and pray to cats and crocodiles? Well, the answer is a little more complex than a simple yes or no. Okay, here is the absolute key distinction. They did not worship the animal itself. They worshipped gods and goddesses who could appear on Earth in the form of a specific animal. The animal was seen as a living, breathing vessel for the divine, an intermediary that physically embodied a god's most important qualities. And it's all about symbolic connection. For instance, cats were associated with the goddess Bastet because of their fierce, protective nature as mothers. The ibis bird, which probes the mud with its long beak as if searching for hidden secrets, was linked to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. And the jackal, often seen scavenging at the edge of the desert where the cemeteries were, naturally became a symbol for Anubis, the god of embalming and the afterlife. It wasn't about the creature, it was about what the creature represented. All right, our final myth. And honestly, this one is a wild ride. It takes us to one of the strangest and most fascinating periods in all of Egyptian history, centered on a single pharaoh who turned his entire civilization completely upside down, a guy named Akhenaten. I mean, this guy was a true radical. In a huge move, he basically fired Egypt's entire pantheon of hundreds of gods and declared that there was only one true god, the Aten, which was the physical disk of the sun. He changed his own name to honor his new god, abandoned the ancient capital of Thebes, and built a massive new one out in the desert. You can imagine how well that went over with the priests of the old gods. It was a total, top-to-bottom revolution. And if you've ever seen the art from his reign, you know it's different. It's really strange. Akhenaten is shown with a long, thin skull, a pot belly, and a weirdly androgynous body. This led people to speculate for centuries that he must have had some kind of genetic disorder. But it wasn't a realistic portrait. It was a religious statement. His body was intentionally depicted to reflect the nature of his god, the Aten, who was seen as both mother and father to all creation, beyond gender. And we even have proof. DNA analysis of the mummy believed to be his shows a perfectly normal-shaped man. The art wasn't reality. It was ideology. So we've busted a bunch of myths about curses and mummies and pharaohs. So what? What's the big takeaway here? Well, it all points to a really important idea we have to grapple with anytime we look at the ancient past. It's a concept called preservation bias. Think about it like this. The stuff that survives for 3,000 years isn't a random sample of a society. It's the stuff that was built to last. The giant stone temples, the tombs hidden deep underground, the objects made of gold. The mud brick houses where 95% of the people lived, the wooden tools they used, their simple clothes. All of that has long since turned back into dust. So what we're left with is a view of ancient Egypt that's completely filtered through the experience of that tiny, ultra-wealthy elite. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? All these myths we've talked about persist because they're based on that tiny, biased sliver of evidence that managed to survive. It really makes you wonder, if this is true for a civilization as famous and well-studied as Egypt, what other crucial stories, what other everyday realities are we missing from the rest of human history?